Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual launch event of our Middle East WMD Free Zone Timeline. My name is Tamisha Bino and I am the Program Analyst with UNIDIR's Middle East WMD Free Zone project. With me today, I have three distinguished guests who are experts on the Middle East WMD Free Zone and who have also contributed to and reviewed our comprehensive timeline of the key milestones in the history and evolution of the zone. So first and foremost, we have Ambassador Karim Haggag, Professor of Practice and Director of the Department of Public Policy and Administration at the American University of Cairo. Also Dr. Or Rabinowitz, who's the Associate Professor at the International Relations Department of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Roman Ustinov, who is a counselor with the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation in Vienna. I'd also like to say thank you to the EU for the support and funding of our project, of which this timeline is a product of. The way we are structuring our event today is that I will start by giving a small introduction of what this tool is and why we decided to create it, followed by a short demonstration of the timeline's features. After that, we'll move to a short discussion with our guests about this new tool, and there will also be time for a short Q&A. All right, with that said, let's get started. This is the second online resource that our project has made available on the UNIDIR website. The first being a documents depository, which is a collection of the main documents related to the evolution of the zone. As for this resource, when we first started compiling all the milestones for the timeline, we thought it would be a pretty straightforward exercise, and we never expected that it would take so much time and research to publish it or have it include so many events. Throughout the process, we engaged several current and former officials from the region and the NPT depository states, as well as experts on the topic who reviewed and vetted the events that we included. One of the main questions we were faced with was where to draw the line, as in what would be in and what would be out, and what the criteria for including an event would be. In the end, the criteria we settled on are, first, that the milestone or document is one that has affected the course of the process, generated new information on the topic, or signified a change in position. The second is that the milestone or document originates from the states that will make up the future Middle East WMD Free Zone, the NPT depositories, or international organizations and forums that have been named in any of the resolutions pertaining to the zone. And finally, availability of the documents to substantiate the event. As you can imagine, in a process spanning over 60 years, there is a multitude of resolutions, meetings, and initiatives that we looked at and included so that we are able to reflect the full picture and show how much work has already been put into the process. Usually, the Middle East WMD Free Zone is thought of as belonging primarily to the NPT discourse, but it's also an issue that affects actions in the UN General Assembly and the Iaea General Conference, one that has been addressed in several regional forums as well. As our aim in making this timeline was to enable its users to gain a deeper understanding of the evolution of the process and the positions of states, another aspect that we had to consider is whether to include certain historical events that affected the course of the process. However, this was a bit tricky because how a certain event is understood can be subjective. So we've limited ourselves to events that were referenced in official documents or statements and attributed those to the states that made them. Nevertheless, we understand, of course, the importance of the subjective views of states involved in really telling the story of the zone. And that's why we're also compiling a third publication in addition to the documents depository and the timeline, which will describe the individual narratives at each of the states involved in the process so as to be able to provide the most comprehensive account. So there are many arms control and non-proliferation and disarmament processes that provide important lessons for the Middle East WMD Free Zone, such as the experiences of other nuclear weapons free zones or regional processes like the JCPOA. But just as important are the lessons from diplomatic efforts on the zone over the last 40 years. And with the ongoing process at the UN, the Conference on the Establishment of a Middle East Zone Free of Nuclear Weapons and Other Weapons of Mass Destruction, having the history documented and presented in this easy-to-use resource, which I'll show you in a bit, can provide points of reference as well as ideas for current and future negotiators, or so we hope. Most importantly, the timeline is a living tool, which means we will be adding new entries to it as the process moves forward. And we always welcome suggestions for entries that fulfill our criteria that we could include. So with that said, I will start sharing my screen with all of you so that we can do a live demonstration of the functionalities of this timeline. Let me first go to the main UNIDIR page to show you how to access the timeline, first of all, and most importantly. So here under Digital Hub, which is a drop-down menu, you can see all the digital resources of UNIDIR. You click on Middle East WMD Free Zone Hub. Here you see both tools that I mentioned, so the depository and the timeline, and we are exploring the timeline today. And this takes you to the main landing page of this tool. I think my favorite feature of this is that it is available in the main languages of the region, so Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi, or Persian. And I think for the purposes of this demo, I'll stick to English. So then we just click on Discover the Timeline to dive in. As you can see, our timeline is divided into decades. So we have the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on, all the way up to the 2020s. It starts with our first event here, and the 50s didn't see too much action for the Middle East WMD Free Zone, nor did the 60s, but we'll see things pick up as we go along. So using the arrows here on the right, you can navigate through the events at the bottom, so you can see the dates of the different events, and you can click on them and to move through them, or you can just use the arrows to keep going forward. If you'd like to skip a decade, you can always just click on it in the ribbon at the bottom. So as you can see here from this ribbon, the 90s saw much more action, and we can scroll through all the dates. Another feature that we thought was important to add to tell the story is what we call mini timelines, or timelines within a timeline. And there are two of these in this tool. The first one is one that is dedicated to the Arms Control and Regional Security Working Group. So for those of you familiar with the process, this needs no introduction, but for those of you who are not as familiar, there are several little forums that were self-contained, and we thought that having dedicated timelines for them would help the user understand them better. So if you go into this, you can see that there's sort of a mini timeline that includes all the events. And you can also sort of scroll through them and just click on whichever one you would like to read about. The second timeline within a timeline, I will have to jump to the 2010s. And that is of the informal consultations in Guyane and Geneva in 2013-2014. So I'll just scroll over to show you that one. Here we go. And it's, as you saw in the first one, it has all the dates at the bottom and the different events. So you'll notice that in some of the text, there are underlined hyperlinked words, and those will have two functions. So first, it'll link to a document that is described in the text. So this is one example of that, and it always opens in a different page. Or it will link, it'll be a cross-reference to another event within the timeline. So here we speak about an invitation letter, which I already know belongs to the event prior to it, so I'll just take you to that. Another feature that you'll notice we have, and I already spoke about this, which is context. We don't have many of those, but you will find those indicated through a small button. So an easy example is this one, which is the first resolution in the UNGA on the zone, or the first time it was adopted by consensus. So as you can see, there's a little button here that says Explore Context, and it includes a little piece of information to better elucidate what happened, or sort of background to the event, and it might even include a document to support it. The timeline also has a search function, as you can see here at the top. So if you have a certain term that you're looking for, so let's say, for example, I'm going to put in Guyane, and it will show you all the events that correspond to that search term. If you'd like to see a specific year, and filter by year. Let me choose something more recent, 2019. I'll also delete the search term, leave it empty. So there's only one event in 2019, but a very important one indeed. It is the first session of the conference at the UN General Assembly. So it'll take you to this. And then you will also notice that there are share buttons for social media at the top. If you think a certain event is particularly interesting or you'd like to reference it in one of your social media outlets, then you can just use one of those buttons. And as you can see, this button up here through the years, if you click on it, will take you to the main landing page. And with that, we can move to something a little more interesting and more interactive. And we'll start the discussion with our guests. So with that said, I would like to start with you, Karim. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but as you're someone who has worked on this issue for a lot of time and most of your career perhaps, we'd like to hear from you why you think that having this timeline is important and who you think would benefit from it the most.
Well, thank you, Tamisha, and really my thanks and commendation to the entire UNIDIR team that really spent a tremendous amount of effort in producing this timeline. I think this was a resource that was produced with a lot of care, a lot of attention to detail, and really what was produced was an invaluable contribution that I think would benefit the community of practitioners, scholars, civil society activists engaged in the issues of arms control and non-proliferation, not just regionally, but also globally. I think what the timeline really provides for us is a very important tool that fills the knowledge gap in providing a very comprehensive resource to the history and evolution of the WMD free zone process. So it provides a factual record of the significant historical and diplomatic milestones. And it also provides very important context to understand the drivers and the overall framework in which this process evolved over a period of decades. And as you said, I think together with the online document depository produced by the UNIDIR team earlier, this timeline produces a very important resource to understand the overall context in which the idea and the project to establish a WM free zone evolved over the years. What I find very useful in this resource is not just the chronology, but also that it was complemented by key documents, statements, position papers, resolutions. The fact that the UNIDIR team also took the time and care to produce this resource in Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi makes it very accessible to practitioners and scholars in the region and as a tool for enhancing understanding and also capacity building in the region itself. So my commendation and congratulations to you on producing something that I think is extremely valuable to the overall zone project.
Thank you so much, Karim, for your kind words. I mean, I'm very glad for all the support that we got from you and in reviewing this as well. And thank you also for setting me up really well to ask my next question. And especially, mentioning how useful this resource is, not just only for practitioners, but for academics, as well as the fact that it's available in the regional languages. So Ori, if you'll allow me, as an academic, as a professor working in Israel, how do you think that this resource will be used by other academics and researchers or by your own students? And do you think that having this resource available in Hebrew will impact how the issue is perceived in your country?
I was very happy, Tamisha, to get your kind invitation to speak. And as you kindly mentioned, I teach and I research nuclear proliferation-related issues, and I'm also an Israeli, which makes it doubly interesting because apparently there aren't a lot of us around, and there's a lot of interest on the one hand and some mystery on the other And I think that the timeline, in addition to the depository and to the third leg of the project you've mentioned in your introductory remarks, the narratives of the different countries, I think it will be an excellent tool for students. It would definitely make it easier for us and more accessible to teach it either in Hebrew if you're in Israel or in the other relevant languages. And I've put together some documents just to give us a taste of different documents that you can find. So for example, and hopefully you're able to see this on your screen, one of the documents I found in the timeline is this newspaper article. It also has a photo added to it. And it talks about a group of Israeli intellectuals who called for the denuclearization of the Middle East as early as March 62. And the thing is, if this is your area of expertise and you've read all the literature and you know all the relevant books that came out recently, then perhaps you've come across this specific bit of information. But most of us, and especially the students we teach, we do not have access to that kind of specialty information. And I think that just by accessing the timeline and being able to read the newspaper article and just seeing the photo, it will very easily give you a taste of the atmosphere of the relevant information you need. Specifically, I think this is a great story that Israel, as early as the 1960s, you had groups of intellectuals, specific one very important group of intellectuals, calling for this establishment of what will in the future become a WMD or a nuclear-free zone, depending on which initiative you choose to take. I've gathered a few other examples which I thought were interesting because they tie into the research I conduct and the topics which I teach. So one document which I liked in particular is this document. You don't have to read it in detail. It's a document produced by Iran and Egypt. They co-sponsored a UN resolution calling for the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in '74. For me as a historian, it's important because in 1974, and this is what we teach our students, the Indians conducted their famous peaceful nuclear explosion, and we see currents and we see different ramifications and consequences, and this is one of them. And a document like this allows me to contextualize the year that I'm talking about and the different trends that were governing nuclear relations in the decade, in the 1970s. So this is, for example, a document which I thought would come in very handy in years to come. And last but not least, this month we're marking the 40th anniversary of a famous Operation Operates, when the Israeli Air Force launched a raid, a strike against the Iraqi nuclear reactor called the Sirak near Baghdad. And I think we tend to overlook the importance of this event, but when we talk about the nuclear weapons free zone and the documents relating to it and the timeline, it's also important to reflect on this for a second. And one of the documents which I found, and again, I think is relevant and interesting for our discussion, is this one. Israel called for holding a conference to discuss the modalities of negotiating a treaty establishing a nuclear weapons free zone in the Middle East. And if you'll notice the date, you'll see this takes place 2 days after the Osirak raid. So again, this happens in the aftermath or in the larger context of Israel having to deal with the reaction to its raid. And we see the issue of the zone popping up. And I think a tool like the timeline is excellent for us as teachers and as researchers to discuss it. I think this is the final document. Again, I'm just giving us like tasters of what it is to be an academic working with this tool. There's the famous Iaea resolution on the Israeli nuclear capabilities and threats. And this document specifically is from October 5th, 87. It's the first time it was adopted. This will basically launch, I'm not sure, an arms race isn't the exact the terminology we should use, but a race, a diplomatic race within the IAEA between Israel on the one hand and an Egyptian-led opposition and the other to pass a similar resolution. And the fate of these votes and these resolutions will to a great degree reflect the diplomacy of the time and the Arab-Israeli conflict and different issues relating to it. So I'm not going to repeat everything that my esteemed colleague Karim Haggag said. I deeply agree with him, and I think it will be an excellent tool for students and researchers. And I will leave you at this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ori. I knew as a nuclear historian, I could count on you to sort of tie all the strands together and highlight what I also think is very important. First of all, sort of the interplay between what happens in the NPT, the UNGA, or the Iaea, as well as sort of, bringing all these strands together. And you even, blew it up even further and said, the Indian test was also part of this context. But as I said, we had to draw the line somewhere, or else all of these events are connected. But yeah, thank you very much for highlighting some of these documents. And I'll go back to both of our two other speakers, so Roman and Karim, to also see if there's any particular document or event that you would like to highlight as well. But as someone who's involved in the current process, Roman, I was hoping to ask if you think that this resource can benefit the conference process that's ongoing now, and how you think that could be.
Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate. You called me an expert at the beginning, but I would like to clear that misinterpretation. I'm absolutely not an expert in Middle East and not WMD free zone in the Middle East expert. I was just involved in those issues for the last, I don't know, 7 years maybe, simply due to my professional duties in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now in together with my ambassador, by the way, Ambassador Iaea, whom you all know. And I guess that the work that you did is extremely important, and specifically the fact that you managed to make it all as factual as possible. We were participating in the review of the drafts of the timeline, and there were lots of interpretations regarding the political interpretations of different events by different countries, by different participants in the same events. And ultimately, what I found in your document is that it is really, really factual. I don't know how you managed it with all the political nuances that are around this problem, but you really did it, and thank you very much. In terms of how it could help the negotiations, in specific terms, I don't know. Maybe it is up to the states of the region to decide how they can use, because this is up to them to create the zone. But one thing I'm sure is that it really creates the conditions, the positive atmosphere, conducive atmosphere for the conference and for the ultimate creation of the WMD free zone in the Middle East. I can tell you personally, for myself, I'm a sort of a product, still a product of the Soviet school educational system. I'm not sure what educational system we have right now, but I'm still from that, which had a very particular signature, which was to know lots of facts. You need to know history and lots of facts in the history. And by the time I finished school, I was stuffed with all the facts, and I thought it was good. And then I studied a bit in the university in France, and I was showing all my knowledge about the facts, and they were like saying, okay, that's good. And I thought they like admire this, but ultimately I found out that they were just making fun of me. Why why there is a need to know so many facts? You can always look them up in the book. So specific things that you can pick up from this timeline and make use for the negotiations, for the conference process. But this is the whole idea that you made it, and that there is a timeline, and that it shows how long the history of this process is, and how many initiatives were put forward. It all creates a certain positive pressure in order to get all the regional efforts together, to get the efforts of the observers at the conference, Russia, Great Britain, France, China, hopefully US would join the next conference, and Israel as a participant. Next session, which is in November, to get all the efforts together in order to implement this long-standing objective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roman. And I think that for most people, yes, you would be considered an expert, even though it's just through your personal, and not through your sort of personal interest or as a researcher, but through your job. And 7 years is quite a long time, and you've lived through some of the most important milestones, I think, of the zone. I'm relieved and very happy to hear that you also found it very factual. I can assure you that this was because of a rigorous process that you're also familiar with. And you mentioned Ambassador Ulyanov, who's a member of our project reference group, who also provided valuable input to the review of this timeline. I would also like to note that, we are moving towards, we have 15 minutes left, I think, within this event. If we need to, we'll go a little bit over time. But if anybody has any questions, I'd like to encourage you and remind you that you can post those in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to take them, whether for me about the timeline or about anything else that our speakers have said. So with that said, I was wondering, Karim, if you had any specific events or sort of documents that you found were specifically interesting in the timeline as we asked you to review it.
Yes, thanks to Misha. I think a few themes stand out. For example, I think that the timeline shows that the WMD zone process really extends way back historically, all the way back to the beginning of the 1990s. And even further back, if we're talking about attempts to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, that, as Ori mentioned, go back all the way to the mid-1970s. So the zone process is really a project that has been decades in the making. And I think that, unfortunately, as a result, the Middle East still remains one of the few regions today without an arms control or disarmament framework, as opposed to other regions that have benefited from such a framework. I think the other interesting thing about the timeline is that it provides, as we said, not just a factual record of the major milestones in the process, but also it highlights the rationale that was the driving force behind the position of key states involved in the process. For example, if we look at Egypt's initiative to actually introduce the idea of establishing a WMD free zone, or the Mubarak initiative all the way back in 1990, what the timeline shows us is not just an effort to actually begin a process for the establishment of the zone, but it also highlights what was Egypt's driving motivation behind this position. And the links to some of the documents and the statements that were referenced as part of the timeline really show that what was driving Egypt's position was an assessment that the challenge of WMD proliferation was one security challenge that would be more and more figure into the region's regional security landscape. So the challenge of proliferation was one that we would have to contend with for a long time to come. And I think that the timeline really shows the rationale behind Egypt's position on this front. I think the other trend you see is, if you look at the timeline closely, how this challenge has been dealt with not just through diplomacy, but unfortunately by the resort to either military force or coercive diplomacy. I mean, Ori mentioned the Israeli raid on the Iraqi reactor in 1980, but that was just one and probably the earliest instance of the repeated resort to military force to address this problem. We've seen it repeatedly in Iraq, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Libya. We see signs of it in relation to the challenge posed by Iran's nuclear program. And so this is a continuing challenge that the region has to face. I think finally, the timeline really shows the degree to which the zone process has been linked to the broader evolution of the global non-proliferation regime. And in particular, the NPT, but also, as you mentioned, other forums such as the Iaea, and also indirectly to other global disarmament instruments such as the CWC, the CTBT, and so on. And I think that the complex linkages that tie the zone process to these broader non-proliferation, global non-proliferation frameworks, I think is extremely important to analyze further, not just for scholars, but I think also for practitioners moving forward in terms of the lessons that we can learn, not just for the past, but also for the future, as I think Councillor Ustinov was mentioning.
I was also having trouble unmuting myself. Yes, thank you for that. And, you know, drawing on both what you said and what Roman said, I do think that even if it's not directly going to feed into negotiations, I think showcasing that so much has already been done is should give us all hope to think that, you know, this is possible. There's a lot of resources already there for us to use. And I think something that I've heard in several statements from regional states is that we're not reinventing the wheel. There's already a lot of knowledge there, whether from other processes or this process itself that can really aid in making this current effort a success. And then just one final round, I'll go to you, Roman. I promised I will do this and put you on the spot again and ask if there's anything in specific that you found in the timeline that you were happy to see or even surprised to see.
Yes, yes, thank you very much for this question, because I really found something that I was surprised to see and I was glad to see. This is exactly the first document, the first event that the whole issue starts with the Soviet initiative. I didn't know about that because everything is clouded by the Iranian claim that they invented the WMD free zone in the Middle East idea and first initiated it. So now I have a totally documented and documented position that it were not them, but the Soviet Union who proposed it. And as you see, we continue as Russia now. We continue to support the whole initiative, and to we continue to make our best efforts to create conditions for the countries of the region to come to implementation of this objective. So it also shows an extreme continuity of our position from back of 1950s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I mean, I'm surprised to hear that you hadn't heard of this, but I'm glad that we could bring it to your attention. Yes, I mean, I think the timeline, or the WMD free zone has several mothers and fathers, as we saw, whether on the Israeli side, the Iranian side, the Arab side, or the Soviet side, Russian side, in continuation till today. The most important thing to keep in mind is that it seems that we're all in agreement that this would be a good thing for everyone. And at some point, each party involved has called for this. So I do have just a couple of questions that I will answer live, unless I don't think that the people who ask would like to ask them themselves. So I'll just go ahead and answer. So will, from Dr. Chris Ferrero, asks if we'll be keeping the timeline updated each year as the November conferences occur. Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, this is a living tool, so we will be updating it with new events, but also with events that we know have happened but don't have the documents or enough data on them. Because as my distinguished expert guests know, and several of you who have researched the zone, there are a lot of informal processes where there isn't a lot of documentation available, so we haven't included those. Although we did do a lot of digging, and were able, with the help of several other experts and personal collections of some people, to add this information and make sure that it's part of the timeline. So I hope that answers the question. And also, a really good friend of mine, Karim. Hi, I'm glad you're with us, Karim Kamil. You ask if we learned anything from the compilation and the selection process of things, and if anything surprised me. I think yes. So I have gone through several of these documents, as you can imagine, over the last year. And the surprising thing is that a lot of the positions have actually not changed much. So whether this is a positive or a negative, I can't really tell. The outcome will decide that. But it's definitely something that really jumped out at me, that I would be reading a statement from the 80s and I could just copy and paste it and put it in a statement today, and it'll be very, very similar. So yeah, that was quite surprising. I'd also like to mention something that we just found recently. So a lot of the research we did, as I said, was done through the review process, whether with Ori, Karim, Roman, and several others. But a lot of it was really just going through people's personal collections. And we recently found several new documents which we'll be adding over the coming months. So keep an eye on that. I don't see any more questions, and we still have 5 minutes left in our allotted time. So I just wanted to ask, do any of the speakers would like to add anything, Ori, Karim, or Roman, before we close? Okay, Ori, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that, and I'm speaking here in my hat as someone who's interested in the early 80s and in the first Reagan administration. There is a gap. There was, so in 81, 82, the Americans were considering how to promote and whether to promote the zone as an initiative. And I think it would be interesting going forward to try either to dig up some documents or even maybe do oral interviews. I mean, time will tell, right? We'll see how the scholarly work evolves and how your work evolves, but I'm sure we'll find out more in the coming years, probably, and it will be interesting to see it in the timeline.
I hope so. Anything else from our other guests?
Yeah, I would just add very quickly 2 points. I think, as Ori mentioned, I think that there's much more that can be done to fill in the context of these important milestones. So, for example, the ACRES process, Tumisha, I think you did a masterful job, you and the team, through your mini timeline of ACRES, of explaining to us how that process evolved and how it addressed the many complex issues involved in the zone process, but also regional security more broadly. But I think one important piece of context that would be useful to fill, just by way of example, is how the ACRES process was embedded in the larger Arab-Israeli peace process throughout the 1990s, and how the issue of regional disarmament in general related to the peace negotiations on the Palestinian front, on the Syrian front, and regionally more broadly. The second point, I think, is that I'm very hopeful that with this timeline and the other resources that UNIDIR has taken the time to provide for us, that this would be an impetus for more in-depth research. I think Ori has led some of the cutting edge work on nuclear history in the region, and I'm very hopeful that others would begin to identify patterns and provide us with more in-depth analysis regarding the historical context and the political context that surrounded these milestones. So I think the ball is now in the court of researchers, academics, or semi-academics like myself to really put our hats on and make use of this resource.
Roman, would you like to add anything before we close?
No, thank you very much. Just to thank you once again for this valuable resource. Thank you.
Thank you so much also for all your support. And Karim, I'm so glad you also mentioned acres. I mean, this was, again, another issue that we, as I said, sort of not struggled with, but it was a challenge to decide how much context we'll bring in. But as I mentioned at the start, a lot of what you mentioned about the peace process and how it relates to the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991, all of that will be covered in the narratives, sort of from the individual viewpoints of each of the states involved. And I think that that would be much more better placed there. I also know that our colleagues from CNS are also working on a Acres Oral History project, which we are definitely really looking forward to seeing the results of that. So a little plug for their work as well. I would like to thank all of the people that have been writing to me in the chat and congratulating us for the timeline. Some of you have also worked on this, so I just want to say to Ambassador Sultania, thank you so much for all your help. And Ambassador Kelly, I'm so glad that you could join us today, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it as well. We have this comment from Nabi Azadi saying that there are some statements that are not captured in October 1970 and September 1971. And I'd actually like to say that they are, but they're not individually captured. But if you look at the main event in 1974, you'll find that we have included statements from also 1969, 1970, and 1971, but they're within the text.
Hi.
Yes, hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for organizing this event. I really found it very useful for the students, for us who are working on this issue. I had some communication with your colleague on this project, Mr. Farzan Sabit, and shared with him some of the Iranians' statements on this issue in early 1970s. Particularly those in October 1970 and September 1971, which the issue of the Middle East free zone was raised by the Iranian foreign ministers at that time in their statements during the General Assembly sessions. I just want to bring that into your kind attention, which was in a timeline which I just watched the show that you presented, and also I checked the website also. It was not captured in that timeline. I would leave it with that, and thank you once again.
You're very welcome, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. But as I mentioned, we did actually capture it, and I can share my screen with you again and demonstrate where. So perhaps it wasn't very clear, but I think that this would be a great opportunity to show how much information the timeline actually has. So we've incorporated all the statements leading up to the first resolution that was tabled in the UNGA under this one. Under this event. And if you go through the text, you'll notice that here it says Iran's request at the United Nations General Assembly was preceded by a statement by the Shah of Iran in 1969. So if you click on the statement, it will take you to the document, which is in our depository. So we're very proud of this, so I'm happy that I got the chance to showcase it at 1970 as well. I'll have to scroll a little bit to get to that point. Hold on. So as you can see here, it also makes reference to the mention of this by the Iranian delegation at that time. And last but not least, obviously 71. So I hope that is a satisfying answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your clarifications. I really noticed that. Thank you.
Okay, well, great. I mean, no, I mean, I'm glad that perhaps this is a good, you know, coincidence that this happened, that you didn't notice it, so I can actually show live something that we hadn't prepared before, but, you know, just to demonstrate how much these little links really matter. So thank you very much for bringing that up. So I think with that, we are only 4 minutes over time. I hope that everybody enjoyed the discussion, but also found it useful, and that the demonstration was valuable, and that you will also be using this and benefiting from this resource in your work, or just if you have a quiet evening and you just have a hankering for learning more about the WMD free zone, that you will just scroll through it, whether on your phone or on your laptop. And yeah, with that, thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope to see you soon at a following event. Thank you very much. Thanks again to my guest speakers for taking the time and sharing all your insights with us. And with that, to everybody in Geneva, happy Summit Day, and have a good evening or afternoon wherever you are. Thank you.